Stark choices face us all at the beginning of this new millennium: to be catapulted into a new prosperity or relegated to poverty and ultimate extinction. That's the view of my guest today, a man who's supposed to teach the bright future, not rubbish it in advance. He's Professor of Information Systems at the London School of Economics. How do his colleagues cope with this dissident in their midst? Ian Angell, a very warm welcome to the programme. You're laughing about this being the dissident. You like it, don't you? You like standing out from the crowd.
Well, I'm a cheerful pessimist.
You pessimists got it all wrong, actually, with the millennium bug,
Not at all, not at all.
Saying we were going to be cast into chaos.
I'm one of the few pessimists who said it wouldn't happen, and it didn't.
This is one of the bits of pessimism, the only bit that you don't subscribe to.
Well, what
really,
I've subscribed to is there's so much complexity in today's computer systems. The millennium bug is a minor problem. There are huge problems out there. We can still face the meltdown, but it will catch us totally unawares. The idea that we have 1 year in advance to prepare for the meltdown is naive to the extreme.
Your contention is that the new technology is actually going to make things worse for most people rather than better. Why?
Well, the nature of the relationship between the individual and the group, the collective, is changing. And what happens is individuals now are free to leave their old groups and set up new economically viable groups. The rich are running away.
So it's globalization.
It's globalization, but it's individuals being able to run away to hotspots.
Economic hotspots.
Economic hotspots. Where they
like
don't
the United States, for instance.
Like the United States, or parts of the United States. Like Switzerland, south of France. There are areas, London as an independent city-state would make
so centres
real
of
sense.
Excellence, centres of commercial prosperity.
And wealth. It's where the rich congregate and where they know that the governance of that area is not going to steal off them excessively.
But with globalization, it doesn't really matter where they are, does it?
Of course it does, because there are evil bastards out there, and large numbers of people are going to be dispossessed. And they are roaming the countryside. You can't, there's none of this lotus eating. You won't be able to go up to the Shetlands and sit in a cottage and telework, because there are bandits around, because there are people with no wealth, no money. They are looking for trouble.
So the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. This is the thesis of the new Barbarian Manifesto.
Be a new barbarian. And that means you have to pillage the status quo. And run to new hotspots where you can take advantage of the wealth-generating potential of new technology and not stay in coal spots where socialist governments will tax you to extinction.
Socialist government. This is a political rant as far as you're concerned, is it?
Well, I was thinking of subtitling it "Why I Hate Socialism," but I thought
what happened to that? They took most of that out of you, the original draft of the book, didn't they?
Well, not really. The argument of why socialism is a product of the industrial age and has no place in the information age is still there.
You blame the corruption in Europe. You attribute that to socialism.
It's not just corruption. The trouble with socialism is that it's entropic. It drives the innovation down to chaos. If you're going to have innovation comes from individuals.
Didn't stop the Conservative government being thrown out largely on the grounds of sleaze, did it, in Britain at least?
Well,
they're all the same, aren't they, the governments? There's no difference between one and the other as far as corruption is concerned.
Yes, but if the governments don't have a project, then the sleaze doesn't really matter. It's when they actually start trying to change your life, interfering with your individuality of what you want to do, taxing you to the hilt in order to pay for it. That's when the problems arise. That's when the rich run away.
Taxing you to pay for those who can't...
Pay for the dependency culture, yeah.
Yes, well, those who can't afford to fend for themselves.
You know, I am...
But that's a kinder, gentler society, isn't it?
Not if everybody's poor, no. This is the myth of socialism. The idea that
those aspects of socialism have gone. They've gone out the window.
No, they haven't. The socialism is about turning society into a machine.
It's the third way now. This is what everybody talks about. Do what works. Do what gets you elected.
What gets you elected is irrelevant. If the rich run away, you get elected by the poor. That's why the New Labour won the last election in Britain. Large numbers of people are dispossessed. They're frightened about the future. And so they actually believe that these politicians can do something about it. But the reality is they're totally impotent. They've lost the plot.
You've got a very bleak view of the world. You talk about market instability, political turmoil and civil unrest. We're witnessing the possibility of a wide-ranging and complete systemic breakdown in many countries. What's the evidence for that?
Well, it's everywhere. You are looking at globalization is in effect the evidence. The nation state came about because of the railway. It was built around the railway. The size of the nation state.
But that's not a systemic breakdown. That's a change in the way societies are ordered, isn't it?
But each of these forms of state develop certain institutions, and those institutions are out of phase with the new economic realities brought about by new technology.
Isn't that the same throughout history when there are changes in technology?
Oh yes, of course. What I'm saying is
they probably said
different.
this in the 15th century when the printing presses arrived.
And it happened, didn't it change? The idea that the world after the printing press was totally different to the world before. The Industrial Revolution, the world after, was totally different to before. We are now going through the information age. The world is going to be totally different. What makes us think that the institutions that were designed to optimize work, which is about the factory metaphor, is going to survive into a new world where the nature of communication has changed? You know, what I'm saying is I'm making a guess, I'm making a stab at the new world. I may be wrong, but one thing is certain, the world is going to change. The status quo is not going to survive.
You worry about the emergence of a new technology underclass, don't you?
And that underclass being organized by what I called old barbarians.
But that's the difference between illiterates and literates, isn't it? Those who can read and write today, and those who can't, and those who can use a computer tomorrow, and those who can't. It's the same thing, isn't it?
It's the same, but it's different. Like all of these things, it's the same but different. We will find new institutions. Hopefully we will find a balance that will ease these pressures. In some regions of the world, those pressures will explode, and there will be major problems. That's why the third world today is full of poverty. The question I ask is, maybe the third world will be equally distributed. We will find bits of the third world here in Europe now. Because the people in the other parts of the world who were too far away to take part in any economic performance now have the possibility of doing it. There are 1 billion new workers entering the job market. This must bring down the cost of labor. Labor has become a commodity. And so, because the transaction costs of instigating work have been lowered. And our institutions are based on the stabilities that are no longer valid. We are overpaying our labor, our unskilled labor, because the competition was too far away. The cost of bringing those products here, the total added in for bringing it over here was more than what we paid local workers.
The answer is
that
education.
is no longer the case.
The answer is education, isn't it? If there is, as the government says, if there is going to be computer access for everybody in the country, or everybody who wants it in the country, then you're going to educate people up to the level of everybody else, aren't you?
The 20% of our population are functionally illiterate. They can't read, they can't write, they can't add up. The idea that these
so they
people,
don't work in this society,
this
never mind
now
tomorrow.
When the industrial age came about, when the agricultural age changed into industrial age, what you changed was one form of physical labor for another. Now the information age requires intellectual labor. This is a belief that somehow education can raise the standards, that somehow it's the software.
Well, if it
that
can't,
matters.
what can?
That's
if education
the problem.
can't raise the
What we're going
you're
to
in
see
education.
a polarization
you're professor of information.
But it's
systems.
an elitist institution.
And you're happy about that?
Personally, yes. I'm an elitist. And I don't mean an elite in the old sense, where you've got these sort of old aristocrats. These are irrelevant. I mean elite in terms of talent. And this talent can be sold on the new electronic media.
Discrimination on the grounds of ability.
On ability, yes. Totally. We won't need passports, you just need credit ratings. Every country will accept you if you have talent. And if you have no talent, you're just a liability. Because we are seeing a situation where individuals are evaluated. Do you add value to a society or do you take it away? And if you have a right-sized society, it means that there's sufficient wealth generating people in society to actually make that society wealthy. If there's too many, if it's wrong-sized, if there's too many people that do not add value in this new information age, then the only way is down.
If you're right, what happens to those people?
Then what we find is society's polarizing. And they will find some form of philosophy of difference. It will be a religious difference, a political difference. They will circle the wagons around philosophies of difference. We will see a lot more racism. We will see a lot more antagonism between groupings. Whereas the hotspots are very cosmopolitan. You know, they thrive on variety, but only the very best.
But you're going to have, you paint this picture of literally people who are in the rich areas, in their hot zones, or smart regions, which I think you also called them, actually behind fences, while the other barbarians, so-called barbarians,
the old
are
barbarians
at the gate,
are outside,
clamouring. You really believe that's going to happen?
Yes.
What's the model for that?
Well, the model is what we have at the moment. We have a first world, second world, third world, only that is distributed geographically. And we conveniently forget about them in Africa, in South America. But with new technology, the first world, second world, third world split will be exactly the same, but it will be much closer to home. And you can look at Britain, you can look at America. There are large sections of the country that are really third world. They're here already. Go to South Wales.
Not that large, are they? I mean, there are sections of inner cities, for instance.
Exactly.
But those aren't large sections compared to the whole population. I mean, you paint a picture of society basically going down the drain.
Well, no,
whole society is going wholesale down the
What I
drain.
paint a picture of is the society is getting older. All has to be paid for. The question is who pays for it. Will the wealth creators, are they willing to pay for it, or will they run away? Christopher Lasch, the American liberal, called this the revolt of the elites. What happens is the elites don't stay and pay more and more tax. They get out. And the model of the film industry and the sports industry is here as an example. You don't stay in the country, you go somewhere else where the tax regime is better. Why did the Rolling Stones not put on a show in Britain? Because if they'd come, they would have gone over a certain period of being in the country and they would have to pay a whopping tax extra. So they said, cancel the tour.
They literally cancelled it because of the
taxes. Exactly. And this is what's happening. People now are making financial decisions, commercial decisions, on the basis of the tax burden.
What happens to governments in this scenario of yours?
Governments have got a problem.
Increasingly less power, increasingly less influence?
They've lost the plot.
They've lost the plot in what way?
Well, basically they cannot tax companies because companies employ their people. If people are employed...
They do tax companies.
Oh, the vast majority get it all back in grants. You know, BMW got 150 million for not closing down its factory in the Midlands. The Chunghwa Picture Tube Company was paid £80 million to open a factory in Scotland. It's the small, medium-sized enterprises who get squeezed with the taxes.
And the middle class?
And the middle classes. But the small, medium-sized enterprises are the future. And these are the ones who are being squeezed with taxes. And they are leaving. Germany's got a real problem now. You know, 500 SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, have left Germany in the last 5 years because of the taxes. The big boys stay there because they know they've got governments twisted around their little finger and they can get the money back off them.
So in the end, governments become irrelevant. So they have much less importance in society. But you're happy about governments having less importance in society,
oh, yes.
aren't you?
Get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
There's no government like no government.
What about regulation? Or is it just the ethics of the jungle? Is that what's left?
No, I believe
big groups of mafia syndicates controlling the world.
No, I believe
multinational companies controlling the world.
I'm a libertarian, which means I believe in a policed state, not a police state.
What's the difference?
There will be taxes, but those taxes are used to pay for the police and pay for the military, pay for public health. And the only role, these are the guardians in society, and the only role of government is to guard the guardians. So there must be taxes, and people willingly pay taxes for when they see the benefit. But when they see it being used to buy votes for degenerate politicians, they get very upset. When the politicians use the money from taxes to pay for health and welfare schemes, whose sole purpose is to get them loved by the population who vote them into power, this is a vicious circle. that ultimately will degenerate society.
You teach this message at the London School of Economics?
I teach this message at the London School
How
of
does
Economics.
it go down with your colleagues?
It's not quite the third way, but it's the only way.
How do they react to that? They don't like it, do they? A lot of them don't like it.
I'm a teacher, and I try to get my students
You're
to think for themselves.
You're politically incorrect, aren't you?
I am politically incorrect, but my pedagogical style is to rattle the cage. I believe in the Socratic method.
Which is?
A teacher is there to corrupt young minds. You have to get them to question the present. You've got to get them to question the status quo. They can't move on until they deny what they believe in. And so it's my role to get them...
Or find reasons as to why they believe it.
And they have got to defend why they believe it.
So you break them down into little pieces?
I simply say, defend it, argue with me, tell me I'm wrong.
About the basics of society?
About the basics of society. And don't give me arguments which are just mere sentimentality.
90% of your students are foreign. Why?
Yes. Well...
Are they better than British students? Are they more qualified?
I can tell you the quality of the essays are superb. And the students I have are excellent. So we're doing something right. They are very, very good students. And so I want to keep doing what we're doing. You've
got a notorious list of students at the London School of Economics. Carlos the Jackal was signed on, wasn't he? Nick Leeson did an external degree. So you're teaching them something?
Not my students, I must add. Not information systems. But maybe in 5 years' time there'll be a few. We'll see.
Where did these ideas of yours come from? You grew up in South Wales.
I grew up in South Wales.
Your father was a policeman.
And I lived in a region which was corrupt to the core.
Not very conservative politically, was it?
No. That's why I became a conservative. I used to go canvassing for the Conservative Party in the elections. I was the only blue rosette in the north half of the Rumney Valley.
So you took a lot of abuse?
Well, no, I only went to the doors where I knew the communists were, just to have some fun. Because I knew we wouldn't win the election, but I thought I'd just have some fun.
So you like being a target, or you developed a thick skin?
Well, I've developed a thick skin, but part of education is stirring things up. You know, the status quo is always wrong. It's how do you move on? How do you reinterpret? How do you think laterally? And that comes about by practice, and you've got to think about the world in different ways. And what I'm trying to do by giving extreme positions is to say the world is different. And if you try to interpret it from the position of the past, you're going to get it wrong. We think through institutions. We think through what we've become, through what we've experienced. The trouble is all our experience comes about from the age of the machine. It comes from the industrial age, when it was perfectly sensible for the masses to be paid large sums of money because they were part of the market. But the nature of economics has changed, and so all of the rationality of the past is not truth, it's just a stability. And now that stability is now failing.
Let's deal with your recipe for this scenario that you've painted, this bleak scenario you've painted. What is it? How do you get round it? How do you turn the future to your advantage, as opposed to being cast into outer darkness?
Run to hotspots. Be ready to move. Make your assets liquid as possible. Never have anything you can't walk away from.
Is that what you do?
Yes.
Literally. So you have bags packed and you're ready to go?
No, but I don't.
How far do you take this?
I don't have a big house. I could have a huge mortgage. If necessary, I'll get out and write it off. You have to be able to write off your assets.
What does it mean for ordinary people? What are ordinary people supposed to do in this situation?
Well,
people who've invested in their houses, have mortgages.
Well, it's an ideal... Isn't it a wonderful way of control by government? You're trapped. You can't run away. They've got you. You know, anything that's fixed and stable...
Most people don't want to run away. I mean, you look at the survey, latest survey of 18-year-olds, 80% of them are so pleased to be British, they want to stay here.
But what happens
These are the young people you teach.
What happens... Well, only 10% of my students are actually British. But what happens when the money runs out, when governments start having to raise taxes? One of the things they will move on is property, because property is fixed. They're finding it very difficult to tax salaries now because though that income is being earned all over the world, they don't have information about where the money is earned. And so increasingly people can leave money abroad in offshore bank accounts. So income is a real problem. They also have to bring talented people in. So what they do instead is introduce hidden taxes and taxes on property, taxes on fuel, taxes on clothes. All of these things are going to come about because it's easy to tax. Things that are fixed are easy to tax. Things that are virtual are difficult.
And if they don't, they bring about their own demise.
Well, something's got to pay for the system. The system has to be paid for. So who pays it? So increasingly you're finding taxation by stealth. In Britain we're seeing it now. Increasingly the income tax levels are kept at a reasonable level. But there's all sorts of new taxes coming in. And so we in Britain are paying far more in taxes than we were, but we don't quite know where's it coming from or where's it going.
How much do you believe in these doom-laden scenarios? Or are you doing with us just what you do with your students, just breaking them down, rattling the cage?
Why should I tell you?
Shaking people's belief. What do you think?
I'm
asking you. I'm asking you.
Do I have to tell you?
Yes. Go ahead.
I believe...
Unless you're going to walk out.
I believe in some of it. It is a pedagogical style. But I am convinced...
Tub thumping.
But
a sermon.
I am... It's a polemic. Because I can see... I like Britain. I like living here. And I want this to be a hotspot. I'm worried that we can become a cold spot if we go the socialist route of Europe. At the moment, we're doing quite well because all of the Europeans who are being trapped by socialism over there are bringing their money out.
Why do you talk about socialism? It's socialism in the way that it was discussed in Eastern Europe or inflicted in Eastern Europe is gone, hasn't it?
We've got
There's a new political pragmatism out there.
It's socialism. Socialism.
You're stuck in the past.
We're not stuck in... Exactly, Europe is stuck in the past. There's socialist governments all across Europe. We've got one in the UK. The idea that society can be turned into a machine and optimized is what socialism is about. And ultimately, it means ignoring the individual. The individual doesn't count. It's the collective that matters. And individuals must give up any form of individuality for the good of society. That's what socialism is, and that's what we've got all across Europe. But it's individuals that create wealth, not the masses.
One of your critics, Professor David Epstein, a virologist, said that Angell's nightmare scenario of 20 years hence won't happen. But he actually painted a worse one, didn't he?
Yes, he said that the Ebola virus would kill us all in 10 years. And he said it 6 years ago.
A note of optimism to end on. Ian Angell, it's been a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.